Okay, here we go. Just wait a second, need 10 seconds to buffer.
No problem. I'm going to keep my webcam off because I find it distracting both to me and to the audience. So
Now we are online now. How you can start.
okay, let's just make sure everyone else is muted and we'll begin.
Yeah.
Okay, good morning, afternoon, and evening to the SPWLA community near and far. My name is Paul Craddock from Schlumberger, and as chair for the Boston 2021 Organizing Committee, it is my honor to open the proceedings of the SPWLA 62nd Annual Logging Symposium. In a normal year, we would be gathered together and I would be welcoming you to Boston, but it has escaped absolutely no one's attention that the past year has been anything but normal. So instead, I welcome you from Boston. I pondered for some time, in fact, actually far too long, what I would say about our wonderful city here. And I decided that I will say this only. Boston welcomes you anytime you choose to visit us. I will spend this time instead highlighting this year's fantastic symposium events and, more importantly, the large cast of people who have made this year's symposium possible, especially given all the challenges we have lived through this past year. Last week, you know that SPWLA hosted 4 excellent short courses. Yesterday, the SPWLA held the 2021 International Student Paper Contest. The workshops and student paper contests were both extremely well attended and I believe enjoyed by all. Fantastic job to everybody involved. Thank you so much. This week, the symposium begins in just a few minutes with our keynote from Neil McCollum of Lloyd's Register, followed by a panel discussion from industry experts and SPWLA friends on the future of petrophysics. Over the next 4 days, we will hold 38 technical sessions split for the first time in the symposium across dual tracks from beginning to end. We appreciate your feedback on this format following the symposium. We wholeheartedly welcome the return of our exhibitors who are showcasing their latest technology products and services. Please go visit the virtual exhibit booth. We will hear from Jim Hemingway, and Katarina Yared, President and President-elect respectively, at the SPWLA Annual Business Meeting, and Jesus Salazar, 61st SPWLA President, will play the role of Master of Ceremony at the Annual Awards Ceremony to recognize outstanding technical and service contributions of our members to the Society and beyond. We have much to celebrate and enjoy this year, but that's only because of the tireless efforts of many SPWLA volunteers, enthusiasts, and supporters. I spend the remainder of my time expressing my deep and sincere gratitude to the following persons and organizations. And I apologize in advance that I cannot call out everyone individually by name, but know that you have my heartfelt gratitude. First, to our sponsors and exhibitors for supporting SPWLA through significant industry challenges over the last year. Their generosity helps keep the Society and this symposium moving forward for the benefit of us all. Please return our appreciation to these companies by visiting them in the virtual exhibit hall this week. I thank the SPWLA International Board of Directors and 38 technical committee members for supporting Boston and laying the foundation for this year's symposium with the selection of the technical presentations you will hear this week. The privilege belongs to Tegwin Perkins, VP Technology, to introduce the technical sessions shortly. I thank the Boston 2021 Organizing Committee which has now grown to an organizing community. The number of people involved in this organization grew substantially during the lead-up, extends far beyond the Boston now, and these folks generously donated their time without having any idea for what we were volunteering for when we signed up for this event a year and a half ago. This 2021 community includes a core team who supported the build-out of the symposium virtual platform: Javier, Sherry, E. Chung, Julie Rowlands, Jeff Miles, Jeremiah, Kevin, listed here. Thank you so much for everything you've done behind the scenes. Martin Poich, Franziska Gunawan, and all of the judges who entirely organized the very successful International Student Paper Contest held yesterday, and whose winners will be announced Wednesday. And all the instructors who led 4 highly approved, well-received, and excellently executed workshops. Again, my thank you to you all. I express my appreciation to our keynote and panelists for participating in this plenary event. We will introduce these speakers shortly, as soon as Lynn kicks me off stage. Again, thank you to you all. We have 20 colleagues who have volunteered to serve as chairs for the technical sessions. Thank you to you all for learning this symposium virtual platform so quickly and putting the online event through its paces during stress tests over the past couple of weeks. Thank you so much for your contributions and everything that you will do this week for us. Now, I offer a very special thank you to our symposium AV superstars: Franziska Gunawan Halliburton, Julie Cowan Baker Hughes, Lin Liang Schlumberger, Nelson Suarez Dubai Petroleum, and Harry Z Core Laboratories. These wonderful friends have taken on a huge responsibility to run every one of the 38 technical sessions over the next 4 days. Their dedication to this cause has been truly outstanding. I so much appreciate your efforts, and I am indebted to you. Again, thank you so much for everything you have done and will do this week. Finally, I express my deep and sincere gratitude to 4 people listed here: Lin Liang Schlumberger and SPWLA VP Information Technology. Lin is the principal reason that we have this symposium online this week. Tegwin Perkins, Lloyd's Register and SPWLA VP Technology. Tegwin is the principal reason that we have a fantastic technical program of nearly 120 paper presentations to share with you. Sharon Johnson and Stephanie Turner at the SPWLA Business Office. I am not overstating when I say that Sharon and Stephanie are the glue that holds together the Society and the Annual Logging Symposium. These 4 persons have been dedicated and instrumental to every stage of planning the SPWLA 62nd Annual Logging Symposium. I owe you all a debt that I can never repay. And then finally, a word of appreciation to my bosses at Schlumberger, who have supported my time in planning and participating in this year's symposium. I so much appreciate your support and patience with me as we've in the lead up to this event. All that said, again, my thank you and appreciation to everybody who's been involved in planning this symposium. It numbers more than 100. And again, finally, welcome from Boston and thank you for being here. All right, Lynn, we are good. We're going to, you tell me when you are ready to start with Neil, and I'm going to introduce Neil in a minute, okay?
Yes.
Very good.
I think we can, yeah, based on the agenda, we can start the broadcast, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so in just a couple of minutes, we will hear from our keynote address from Neil McCollum. Chief Technology Officer at Lloyd's Register. So Neil has responsibility for Lloyd's Register's commercial software business, the data digital innovation strategy and technology related to their corporate development. Neil coordinates and directs the Lloyd's Register's group technology and innovation programs through its international teams, the Lloyd's Register Safety Tech Accelerator, and the Maritime Decarbonization Hub, as well as working in close collaboration with the Lloyd's Register Foundation, which funds extensive industry-focused research and education activities in support of its mission to make the world a safer place. Neil came part of Lloyd's Register in 2013 through the acquisition of the Synergy Group, a high-growth energy services and technology business. Neil joined the Synergy Group as Managing Director of Synergy Alternative Energy in 2007, ultimately becoming a director and shareholder in the business with responsibility for software, technology, and innovation. Previously, Neil has held roles of CEO of ITI Energy, consultant with Bain & Company, and senior management positions with ExxonMobil. Neil has a clearly distinguished career, a fantastic and expansive perspective on our industry, and I'm so much looking forward to hearing from him. Neil, I see you online now. Thank you so much for being here from Heathrow Airport. And without further ado, Lynn, I hand it over to Neil, and let's kick on with the keynote. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Let me broadcast. So, Neil, could you please mute yourself for the moment? Yeah, thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Neil McCollum, and I'd like to add the warmest of welcomes to everyone from around the globe that are joining us today for what is the 62nd SPWLA. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Lloyd's Register Group, and I head up LR's digital businesses, and I'm proud to have had a long association with the IC business, which I hope many of you are familiar with, for more than 12 years now, back to the days when it was part of the Synergy Group. When invited to participate in the opening of this year's event, I spent some time thinking about the purpose of this address. In summary, I hope what I can do is a few things. Firstly, set a broad scene and context for the various interactions that will happen over the coming days. As engineers and scientists, we naturally like to focus in on detailed topics, but the world in which we are operating is, as it always does, changing. But the degree of change is almost certainly accelerating more than ever. We need to adapt and evolve quickly, both as individuals and as businesses. Secondly, I hope to engage and mobilize the amazing field of talented people in our industry represented here today in what may well be the greatest challenge humanity has faced, a challenge which has the potential to affect many generations to come, our children's children and beyond. And thirdly, while not downplaying the magnitude of change and uncertainty, I've great hope that through open, honest and well-informed dialogue, this constituency can play an inspiring role in moving our great industry forward into the brave new world. So, on to the central topic of this address, which is the great energy transition which is playing out across the world. This transition will clearly influence and shape all our working lives in the coming decades, but also have immense and far-reaching implications for global society. To start, let me frame the context of what we mean by the climate-driven energy transition. And for me, it's perhaps most simply stated as the following. The energy transition refers to the global shift from fossil-based systems of energy production and consumption, which result in high emissions of CO2 and other greenhouse gases, to a world of increasingly low and ultimately net zero human-created climate-changing emissions. This implies rapidly accelerating changes in policy, economics, technology, and investment patterns globally. But of course, this won't be the first major transition that humankind has experienced. There have been many transitions, from bronze to iron to steel, from water to steam to power, from biomass to coal and then to gas and oil, from horse-drawn vehicles powered by internal combustion engines. In the latter part of the 20th century, we've moved from analog to digital systems, which in itself created a wave of multiple transitions which have changed how we live our lives as consumers and in many sectors led to huge change through the emergence of disruptive business models. Let's pause for a moment to consider one of those transitions in more detail. From horses to cars. It initiated around 1910 and by 1930 was largely complete, with millions of horses replaced by an equivalent and rapidly escalating number of motor vehicles. I did one amusing retrospective comment on this particular transition when I was doing my research, presumably from a horse enthusiast, which went something like, you know, horses are much smarter than people. After all, who ever heard of a horse going broke betting on people? Of the transitions I've mentioned, this one was relatively short and simple, but they are more often complex and non-linear processes. They happen at multiple levels, there are multiple actors involved, and they're multidimensional. They're often dynamic, radical, and occur over relatively long timelines. Although in this last point, it's important to note that some of the technologies that will likely be dominant in the end state of this transition, solar and wind, for example, have already gone through 2 to 3 decades of fairly intense and radical innovation and subsequent dramatic reduction in cost and increases in efficiency. In fact, there are a vast range of technologies and techno-economic considerations at play. There will be different primary and derivative energy sources. Some examples: end-to-end decarbonized hydrocarbon. In other words, oil and gas extraction coupled with CO2 capture and storage. There will be an array of different renewables technologies, some already very dominant: wind, solar, and photovoltaic, wave and tidal, etc. There'll be nuclear power, fission, and in time, presumably fusion, and emerging variants such as smaller scale modularized reactors. There will be biofuels in all their many varied forms and diversity of feedstocks. And of course, the emerging narrative around power to X, talking about the use of renewable electricity into electrolysis as a pathway to renewable hydrogen and other possible derivatives. As well, there will be many related enabling and underpinning technologies: power and energy storage, fuel cells, electrification, and transmission and distribution advancements, material science innovations, and electrochemical and electromechanical advances. The age of the machine learning, AI, and how these technologies can radically change how we produce, manage, and consume energy. Manufacturing and robotics, enabling redistribution of source, manufacture, and consumption locations and improvements in efficiencies. All of these will contribute and enable. And even within the diversity of end-use sectors, the emerging solutions and pathways will likely be very different. We already see in the small-scale private transport sector the emergence of battery and hybrid technologies, ultimately on a pathway to replace the internal combustion engine. Commercial and heavy goods vehicles will not likely be the same. They'll probably require a combination of hybrid battery and hydrogen or other new fuel vectors. In marine and shipping, clearly a sector close to LR's origins, heavy fuel oil is transitioning to some extent to an adoption of LNG, which in time presumably will migrate to green hydrogen, ammonia, biofuels, or other chosen optimized fuel alternatives. So the transition will be varied and complex, but it is happening and it will have to accelerate. Since 2002, I've had the opportunity to work across both sides of this transition, having been involved in early stage funding and investment in several areas of low carbon technology, while still working closely in businesses whose primary income was derived from hydrocarbon production. So for me, the energy transition has been happening for many years now. It's just the visibility and pace are now much more acute. The evidence of this acceleration and intensification of the transition are varied, from oil companies like BP and Shell committing to net zero by 2050, to governments and other state actors announcing bold targets. UK is setting to cut emissions by 78% by 2035. The US and EU are setting ambitious goals for cessation of petrol and diesel car production, and General Motors pledging to be all electric, at least for SUVs and light vehicles, by 2035. Let me now turn to consider the topics of risk, rationality, and reality. And as in any great debate, there are polarized perspectives and a broad spectrum of opinions. On one side, there are those who I'm sure would still say shut down hydrocarbon production now, while others would argue that the link between man-made greenhouse gas production and climate change is still sufficiently unclear, and that we should carry on regardless. And I'm sure there's a spectrum of perspectives across today's audience. The challenge facing mankind around concerns of energy and climate is that there is no absolute certainty, just the huge weight of global risk and balance of probabilities. Unfettered climate change is becoming clearly one of the biggest risks and threats to mankind. To use the Tom Clancy phrase, it is a clear and present danger. Perhaps I can take a slight direct digression to talk about risk. Alongside our IP and IC businesses, Lloyd's Register has the world's leading software used to secure the license for a new nuclear power plant, and that product has been used by about 2/3 of all new nuclear power plants currently in operation. I mention this not because I expect anyone in the audience is a potential buyer of this software, so this is not an advertorial. Rather, I think most of us are aware that when it comes to societal view of risk, the nuclear industry is one of the most prominent. Consequently, when we talk about risk in the context of the nuclear industry, the great fear is loss of containment. And of course, events such as Chernobyl and Fukushima have reinforced this fear. And this creates a clear and absolute requirement to drive, through rational risk management, the probability of this risk occurring and driving that to as close to zero as possible. So, what relevance does this approach to risk management have to the energy transition? Well, it might be tenuous, but mankind can and is modelling the different scenarios of impact of progressively higher global temperatures. Once we get past the plus 1.5 degree average increase, it quickly starts to look very daunting. Whereas these scenario models cannot be perfect, they do indicate that an unfettered rise in global temperature will have catastrophic effects, both for humans and the wider state of the planet. The direct environmental consequences on, for example, food production are bad enough. When we start to think about indirect impacts, they become even worse. Many countries and economies will more than likely see economic collapse, potentially worse than that suffered in Europe and the US in the 30s. And with that, there will be consequently mass migrations, social pressures, and the probability of this sparking material interregional conflicts. These scenarios, much worse than a global pandemic or a major loss of containment in the nuclear industry, are what is driving the urgency of global efforts to reduce the probability of such events towards zero. Unfortunately, it is not as simple as switching off oil and gas supply, even that if that could be physically and practically done in the near term. The consequences on the world economies would also be catastrophic and again would make the current pandemic-driven recessionary conditions likely seem like a mere hiccup. So let's set aside the debate on is it real or how real is it, and agree that the danger is sufficiently clear and present that all parts of human endeavour must work with conviction and pace to move us to a new area for the global energy industry. Let's ensure that the oil and gas industry can be a proud and effective agent for this change, and in doing so, ensure the long-term demand for accumulated intellectual talents and capabilities. Let me now turn to the obvious concluding question of so what? And in particular, what might this all mean for you and your colleagues and businesses? On one hand, we know the world will continue to consume and burn hydrocarbons for the foreseeable future. There are direct opportunities associated with the realities of a hydrocarbon industry as a key component and part of an energy industry in transition. Firstly, there's the continuing need to find and develop a portfolio of ever lighter and cleaner hydrocarbons with lower greenhouse gas emissions. Secondly, there's a concerted effort required across the industry to find massive, secure, long-term and economic subsurface containment of captured CO2. Currently, this is not an economic option, but there are encouraging projects and encouraging demonstrations that have been carried out, and if there's one industry that knows what to do with CO2 once it's captured, it's undoubtedly the upstream oil and gas industry. Thirdly, there's the continuing effort to drive down the cost of production, creating capacity to both reinvest in how we as an industry decarbonise the fuels we have to offer consumers and to absorb the likely escalating costs of carbon pricing. As the eminent Oxford professor Miles Allen has postulated, the combined oil, gas and petrochemical industry has all the technical and commercial skills necessary to create a thriving subsurface CO2 storage industry to directly decarbonize the future use of hydrocarbon-based energy sources. However, decarbonizing production and consumption of hydrocarbon is just one trajectory creating new opportunities. For the skills and talents around this virtual room to grow and develop, there are many other. Geothermal energy has been exploited and will continue to be exploited. It's not likely hugely scalable, but there will be ongoing developments, and of course, they need some of the very similar skills or exactly the same skills as have been developed in this network around the room or around the virtual room. There will be extensive mining, minerals and other resources needed to support the energy transition. For example, rare earth elements for magnet and generator manufacturing such as lanthanum, battery and other energy storage such as lithium, graphite, cobalt and manganese, and for solar and PV production, boron and phosphorus and other compounds are needed. Energy storage, which will of course need to emerge as a much more scaled and widely adopted capability to enable the transition from hydrocarbon to electron economy, various schemes have been developed, such as compressed air energy systems, which require subsurface capabilities and technologies. Nuclear power production, fuel and waste, ultra long-term stable storage need to be supported and developed further. Indeed, transitions often represent a radical change, and that triggers a range of human responses ranging from avoidance, denial, fear, stress, inspiration, and of course the classic entrepreneurial response, which is change equals opportunity. My role today is only to stimulate thought and discussion. I'm not here to tell any of you or your companies what to do. That is not my role. So what can we, as deep industry experts, both individually and collectively do in response to the seismic shifts ahead? Well, as I say, it's not for me to tell any one of you what to do or the great companies you work for, but I would like to postulate a few lines of consideration. Stay positive, engage and be proactive in helping our industry evolve and change. Search for how your technical skills and capabilities can help address the challenges we collectively face, keeping alert to the new avenues of opportunity and growth. Continue to strive to help our industry become ever more efficient. This will increase our ability to reinvest and reinvent ourselves. I realize this topic is emotionally charged, and I hope I've managed to strike an appropriate balance between the status quo and the future ahead. And with that, I will hand back to our moderator, and I'll be more than happy to take some questions and discussion points in the few minutes we have left. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Neil. First of all, Neil, you with us live and you can hear me okay?
I can hear you. Can you hear me, Paul?
We can. I'm sure there's going to be a little background noise, but that we are good here. Fantastic. So first, I'd like to say thank you so much for the keynote and for joining us. I appreciated the forward-looking perspective that you shared with us today. It's a big picture. We have some big challenges to solve, but we are a big industry, and I particularly look forward to seeing both the operators and service companies working together to address these challenges. Everybody who's online, please feel free to type in questions into the Q&A dialog box that you will see in the yellow bar beneath the video streams. I'm going to turn on my video if it's not too laggy, and we will ask questions. I do see one coming in already. So let me start the video. All right. I don't know when you'll see me, but okay. So Neil, first question. It was a comment from Ahmed Badruzaman, but I believe that you may be able to provide input on this. Carbon capture is feasible, but storage has serious issues. Recent challenges in the Chevron CCS project based in Australia cautioned us on that. I'll ask Ahmed if he wants to provide more comments on this, to please do. Neil, perhaps you can comment on challenges in the CCUS value stream, either specific to ongoing projects or the future, to Ahmed's comment. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't have any direct knowledge of the particular subsurface structure that Ahmed was referring to, but I do know from past experiences when we've been working on carbon capture and storage projects previously that one of the big challenges to the regulators and to governments will be the provision of what's called MMV, monitoring, measurement and verification, because clearly for CO2 storage to work in the long term to abate climate change, we've got to be confident that that storage is secure and secure for a very long period. So the topic of MMV is going to become quite paramount once we've proven the economic prospects of carbon storage. But clearly technically feasible, but we're going to get to a point where capture and storage is economically competitive, and then we've got to go and work through those challenges on the monitoring, measuring and verification. So certainly not a simple option.
Oh, you are muted.
Thanks, Len. Thank you, Neil, for that answer. On the topic of, I guess, long-term government involvement in carbon markets, I guess. What are your thoughts generally about carbon offsetting? Neil, do you believe that they are a good way to decarbonization? Or is carbon offsetting, as it's used, for example, in California, just a way of moving carbon budgets around, and it doesn't really have a big impact? What are your thoughts on carbon credits and such?
Paul, so a big complex topic in its own right, and one I'm not going to do fair justice to, but I would say that the challenge with carbon offsetting has been an overriding concern about the ability to trace and verify that when an offset is claimed that it is truly additive and incremental offset, and that it's not, as you say, moving kind of the burden of carbon from one balance sheet to another, as it were. So I think, although that's a major impediment, and the reality is that we're not going to crack the climate change issues with offsetting alone, my personal view is that as we build better models and methodologies for verifying both the transparency and quality of offsets, and be able to track those through long periods of time, I think the offsetting market will have a major role to play in addressing the climate challenge. On a personal note, I'm very interested actually the degree to which, if we get that verification and traceability right, the addressing of climate change through certain types of offsets could also go some way to address the significant challenges we've still got in terms of restoring some of the natural environment that we've depleted. A recent study says we've now touched over 97% of the Earth's ecosystems, and only 3% are remaining relatively natural. So I'm hopeful that offsetting can be a weapon to address the climate change challenge, but also can be a support to efforts to restore and regenerate natural systems and natural habitats as well.
Thank you, Neil. I agree. The whole regulatory aspect is extremely involved and complex. Thank you. We have a question here from Raghu Ramamurthy. It's a comment and then a question. This is quite technical. So every kilogram of oil burned generates about 6 kilograms of CO2. Oil is usually pushed out of the rock and to the surface by pressure in the reservoir. To push CO2 back into the rock, we have to work against this pressure. Containment issues apart, I don't think we can even touch upon those in the time we have. Have we considered the cost associated with the additional work to be done to capture underground? Quite a technical question, but it feeds into the economics.
Yes, it does, Paul. And look, I am not a petrophysicist or geoscience scientist, so I'm not going to be able to address the technicalities of that. But I can say from the projects that we have worked on historically, there are undoubtedly several elements that contribute to the economic challenge of capture and storage. On one hand, not even the question of the energy required to compress the gas into the subsurface structure. There's the not too minimal question of the energy required to capture the CO2 from the atmosphere. The very nature of the thermodynamics is when you're burning a fuel, the end products are ending up in a thermodynamic state that they're quite happy being there. They don't want to necessarily move back across that equation. So I think there are challenges there, and therefore I don't think CO2 capture and storage can be a silver bullet to answering the climate change issue. But the reality is we've got such a huge mountain to climb here. I think all of the technologies and all of the capabilities are going to be needed and need to be pushed forward at pace to actually further verify and understand the economics. But I agree with his observation about the physical constraints and issues associated with it.
Thank you so much, Neil. We have about 3 minutes left. I wish we could continue this conversation for a long time. I'm going to ask a broader question here. Which energy companies, or perhaps have energy companies, either operators or service companies, made substantive changes to their strategy in response to the so-called energy transition? In other words, are we doing a good job here as an industry? Are we behind? Are we ahead? And are you willing to highlight any companies that you think are doing particularly good or ahead of the curve in this regard? Thanks, Neil.
Yeah, Paul, I mean, I think the reality is the industry hasn't moved massively over the last sort of 15 years, but I think rather than try and beat anybody up about that, I think that's a hard case of economics. The value add, firstly, the quality of hydrocarbon as a fuel and an energy source is quite remarkable. The energy density and all of the qualities associated with the energy products and fuel products that are generated from hydrocarbon extraction are extremely useful and extremely efficient and effective for what we sought them to do. They're also very good across the long run. They've been hugely productive from an economic perspective as well. And many of the areas of new energy development, production, etc., they don't have necessarily the same economic return. So I think it's unreasonable to have expected that many of the oil companies and the supply and service industry that support those companies could make an easy transition because of the sheer economic differences between the old and the new technologies. Having said that, it's fair to acknowledge that many of the most well-known international oil companies like BP and Shell have been through several iterations and made some quite substantive investments in scaling of their renewable energy portfolios, and they've been somewhat cyclical. But clearly in recent announcements, they've made very substantive long-term commitments, and they're rebuilding some of those areas that they're investing in that align to the energy transition. But perhaps the most remarkable example would be that of Ørsted, which is a company that was created from the Danish oil and gas company Dong Energy. And they basically transitioned in recent years to be wholly focused on offshore wind, and are now, as far as I'm aware, the largest offshore wind power producer anywhere on the planet. And at one point last year, the market cap for Ørsted as a pure offshore wind player, I think, was somewhere in the region of 20 to 30% of the total market cap of BP. So there are substantive examples of change and development, but I would say we're still fairly low down the S curve. So I think a long way to go, but some points of encouragement.
Neil, thank you so much for that, I would say, remarkably balanced and fair assessment. we are operators, right? We are adhered to the supply and demands of the the global population, and so I totally agree with you on that. Thank you so much for those answers. Ladies and gentlemen, we are at the time where we will need to move on to our panel discussion. Neil is also at Heathrow Airport and has a plane to catch soon. So I think at this stage, we should thank Neil collectively so much. I know that you don't have audio, but on behalf of everybody here, Neil, I would like to thank you for participating in this and for sharing your perspectives. And I know that the panel discussion will touch upon and expand upon many of the comments and topics that you described in your keynote. So again, Neil, thank you so much for joining us, and we wish you the best of luck on your travels.
Thank you, Paul.
And we hope to see you again soon. Yeah, you're most welcome.
It's been an honor, and thanks for your moderation. Cheers. Bye for now.
Thank you. Okay, Lynn. I wish we could continue this conversation with Neil, but unfortunately, things are working against us here. So why don't we migrate across now to the panelists? And at this time, I'd like to invite Siddharth Misra to take over as the Master of Ceremonies, and he's going to introduce the panelists and run the panel discussion. This will go for about 60 minutes, and then it will open up for live Q&A. Again, please type your questions into the chat window, and we'll go from there. So, Lynn, over to you, and over to Sid. Thank you so much.
Yes, I think it's over to Sid and Adam. Yeah, please go ahead with your panel discussion. Yes, thank you.
Hi, Lynn. I just want to have a quick check. Am I audible? Can you see me? My camera is on.
Yeah, perfect. Everything perfect, yeah.
Great. Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night to all of you who are listening. We have a lot of people who are tuned in. And this panel discussion that we will have will be continuing from where Niall left. So today we have in our panel people from different geographies, different expertise. There are some people from service companies, some from operators. I'm from academia, I'm a moderator, and my goal will be to get the conversation going on and touch on important aspects of the future of petrophysics. That's our focus for today. So first, I want to thank Adam, who has been a very helpful resource, who has organized this panel. So Adam, thanks a lot for your help. And Lynn, Paul, everybody from the SPWLA team has done a great job to get this panel in a good shape. Now it's time for me to introduce the panelists. I'll go with a very short introduction. I'll kind of tell the speciality of these panelists and what they think the future holds. Okay, so with that, let me begin introducing panelists in order of their family names. So the first one is Michel Claverie. After close to 38 years with Schlumberger, he retired as the Technical Director of Petrophysics domain for Schlumberger Wireline. Currently, he's a visiting lecturer with Imperial College London. He specializes in various advanced petrophysics technologies such as resistivity and isotropy, NMR, dielectric, and gamma ray spectroscopy. According to him, a successful future of petrophysics requires a tight symbiotic relationship between the users, facilitators, and the suppliers of petrophysical data. Any imbalance between the three parties will result in a common loss. Next, we have Robert Gales. He's the chief geoscientist with wireline and perforating at Halliburton. He specializes in the integration of data from core to production with a focus on closing the loop. He has contributed to the petrophysics community through his service on several SPWLA, SPE, EAGE committees and boards over these years. According to him, the future of petrophysics is bright because it is the one discipline that looks at the detail of the rock and fluids to understand what and how that is used by geologists and engineers for dynamic reservoir characterization. So this is very encouraging. Next, we have Essie Kwabi. She's a petrophysicist with Apache Corporation. Her specialty is multi-mineral analysis and core analysis for complex reservoirs and unconventionals. According to her, despite the temporary dip in the industry, SE believes that petrophysics will remain essential to various disciplines in the oil and gas industry. Petrophysics will help us discover faster and more effective technologies to get the right answer with logs, cores, and data. Uh, a little bit about Essie. She is a co-founder and president of Apache Black Professionals Network. She's a self-development junkie who is passionate about personal finances, philanthropy, and music. Next, we have Mark Ma. He is senior petrophysics consultant at Saudi Aramco. His specialty is dynamic petrophysics. Some of his key papers that he has published with SPWLA are those on spontaneous imbibition and scaling. So do check out, those are very well cited. According to him, the future of petrophysics is something that will get significantly boosted by IT technologies and data analytics. He grew up in China. His training was in US, and he has been happily working in Saudi Arabia for the last 2 decades. Finally, we have Jennifer Market. She'll be bringing us perspectives from the mining industry. She is the principal geophysicist at MPC Kinetic in Australia. She was the global acoustic advisor with Lloyds and Weatherford. Her specialty is acoustics, geomechanics, and mining. She started the SPWLA Acoustics Special Interest Group. She has written an article which some of you can refer to, something like Advanced Petrophysical Applications for the Australian Mining Industry. Do check that out. Her one-line summary for today's discussion will be, there's a much broader petrophysics community that might not yet know or call themselves petrophysicists. The mining industry is an example. It's rapidly moving. It's moving from basic gamma ray tools to advanced petrophysics. So do check out the use cases of formation evaluation and petrophysics in mining. So with that introduction, with all the panelists who are from different geographies, different regions, different expertise, let's start with the first question, which is on a lot of our minds. The first one is, what is the current state of petrophysics and formation evaluation? How is petrophysics being currently used in different regions and geology? For this question, I invite Michelle and Bob to begin the discussion. Then Essie and Jen can follow. And finally, Mark can conclude this particular question, the current state of petrophysics.
Thank you, Sid. So it's age before beauty. So obviously, petrophysics, as we all know, is used in a great variety of environments. Although we have experienced a steep decline in the past few years of the offshore exploration worldwide, but that is moderated by some bright spots, for example, recently the Caribbean Sea. And I think we also see nowadays a trend for new or restarted offshore and onshore projects. Interestingly, the worldwide petrophysics activity is very large in some places that may be unexpected to some of you. Of course, we see for wireline activity, North America is very active, but increasingly, we see large activity in Saudi Arabia, in China, and Russia. And in terms of LWD measurements, really great activity in Russia, in Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. Now, this activity worldwide of the oil field has created great opportunities for local geoscientists in newly explored areas. And these geoscientists have in turn enriched the expertise and the ability of the global community of petrophysics. And nowadays, many of our global experts come from areas that have experienced oil field activity only for 1 or 2 decades.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Sid. It's a real honor to be part of this distinguished panel today. I think the requirements vary a lot based on the type of reservoir. And so the more complex the reservoir, or the higher risk of the wells, deep water is a good example, we're going to run more data. We're going to run more complicated data. So that's good from a petrophysics point of view. We get to analyze a lot. But then we get the flip side. And so if we look at North America, where we're heavily dominated by the unconventionals, we get the extreme, a few science wells with good information, but then we get a lot of wells with little information. So from a petrophysics point of view, we have to get good at, what do you want to call it, being adept at blending that high intensity, less frequent information with much broader, low intensity information, mud logs, drilling information, and production information, to be able to come up with good results. The advantages I see, and the fun part I find as a petrophysicist, is the advancements that are actually being done in use of analytics tools and high-speed processing to allow us to generate decision-making information with all that information.
Yeah, thank you, Sid, for having me, and thank you everyone for having me here today. I'm just going to take a little different spin to the question. I see petrophysics as the glue that keeps all the disciplines together. So it has its application in several different type of geologies, as you know. We use it in conventionals, shale plays, carbonates. We do utilize a lot of the advanced logging and coring analysis to understand the rock better, so that we could feed that into different disciplines. So we work very closely. I see petrophysics as a glue that keeps all these disciplines together. So we integrate with modeling, with completions, and into geomechanics, so that we could understand the rock better while drilling, and make sure that the well bore is stable. We do use it for storage, understanding how much of storage we have in there. So working closely with the reservoir engineers to understand space and be able to maximize our investments whenever we go out there to drill, and or even complete uncompleted wells. So that is how I see petrophysics in our region, is a glue to multiple disciplines.
Good, I guess, morning for most of you. Thanks for having me on the panel with a bit different view. So as many of you knew me in the oil field for a good 20 odd years, and I've made a jump to mineral logging, which is actually perfect timing to be entering it, because there aren't really any petrophysicists in the mineral logging world. There are actually geophysicists who don't know that they're actually doing the job of petrophysicist. So 3 years ago when I came over, people were using qualitative gamma ray and density measurements, and just beginning to realize that you could actually get a true density, an actual calibrated density, that you could actually get VSPs, that you could get sonic logs that could actually tell you about hardness and geomechanics. So in the mining world, we do a lot of blowing things up. But if you want to blow something up efficiently and scoop it out of the ground as quickly and cost effectively as possible, you need to know about the petrophysics. You need to understand the rock. You need to understand how it's going to behave when you try to dig it out of the ground. And everything is about efficiencies on vast scales. So today I logged 600 wells, if you like, most of them averaging less than 10 meters. So it's all about volume. It's all about understanding. So it's a beautiful place for machine learning. We even take high-end things like elemental spectroscopy, so getting elemental analysis for every hole. So for those of you who might be liking to look at a little different way to use petrophysics, it's a beautiful place to be right now in mineral logging, because it's right when it's getting exciting and people are beginning to see the value of it, and we're getting all the fun toys. Not just what's used in the oil field, though there is definitely some crossover, but actually some things we could feed back into the oil field about efficiencies and automations. Yeah.
Great. So Mark, do you hear me?
Sure, yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, great.
All right, thank you. Since I'm the last one for this topic, I would like to summarize what we have been talking about. This is a SPWLA meeting. I assume all of us here knows what is the petrophysics is, but maybe our definition are slightly different from one to another. To me, petrophysics may be classified into like exploration resources petrophysics and development well evaluation, mainly for geosteering and well placement, and also formation evaluation. A big one is reservoir surveillance in both vertical and horizontal wells. And don't forget, we have a whole bunch of people working in the lab generating rock and flow data for us. Lastly, the data integration and the petrophysical modeling. So we have 1, exploration, 2, development, 3, surveillance, 4, the lab work, lab core analysis, 5, modeling integration. So that in my dictionary, that is the petrophysics. Then in terms of geology, of course, rocks are rocks. Each piece of rock is different from others. But maybe we can classify into shaly sand, carbonates, and unconventionals. For shaly sand, you have to really pay attention to clays, clay types, clay amount, and clay distributions. For carbonates, cross structure characterization is a key task or challenge also. Of course, unconventionals are completely different than the conventional rocks. So basically, that is a summary. What is the petrophysics and what is the effect of geology to petrophysical workflow? Thank you.
Great. Thanks a lot, Mark, for that. So all the panelists, thanks for informing us about the current state of petrophysics. For the audience, feel free to ask questions, put it on the chat. After we finish the panel discussion, we'll open it up for more questions from the audience. If you have anything that kind of raises in your mind, just put it on the chat and we'll answer that. So going ahead, technology is shaping the world of petrophysics. Technology, like art, is an exercise of human imagination. Technology is the engine of change. So how are new emerging technologies influencing the world of petrophysics? That's the question that we want to address. So Bob and Mark, you can go first. Jen, Michelle, you can follow up. And Essie, you can give us the concluding remarks on this question. How is technology shaping up the world of petrophysics?
Thank you, Sid. That's a very interesting question, particularly after you've been in the industry 1 or 2 years. I've been here a little longer than that. And my observation is over the last probably 10 or 15 years, there's been no new measurements that we brought into the industry. And if you look at it from a wireline or an LWD perspective, it doesn't make any difference from a petrophysics view. We can get almost everything in either mode and almost with identical quality. So we can get into the pros and cons of each one of those. But technology has had a dramatic impact on our business. If you look at it, we have shorter, more reliable tools, taking the same type of measurements because of improved detector. We can go through the whole arsenal of things. We get a lot more information out of those tools. So that allows us to do a much better job of our formation evaluation. So we can spend a lot of time going into a lot of the different ones, but just a few of them that quickly pop to mind for me is in my early days, I remembered a thing called ultra long, electrical resistivity sonde or some dang thing. And we were trying to map salt zones away from the tool. Today, if you look at what we can do with azimuthal resistivities, it's phenomenal what we can do around the wellbore, in front of the wellbore. If you look at where we started with NMR technology, pushing 30 years ago anyway, where we're at today with faster, better bed resolution, and what we can do for fluid identification understanding the fluid typing and the pore geometry. It's changed dramatically how we approach understanding our reservoirs. And then a couple other ones is, having played a lot with fractured reservoirs, is what's gone on to improve the clarity of images we can get in oil-based mud today, from both the ultrasonic and the resistivity equivalent type measurements. So I find those type of things have moved our industry significantly forward. The challenge then is we got this much data today to play with. And so the things that we do to integrate that using different types of data analytics tools and computer horsepower to actually handle that kind of volume and still do it in a timely fashion to make decisions. I find it quite fascinating to have seen this progression over the years. So no new measurements, but a lot of technology changes that have made our life easier, more exciting. Thank you.
Thank you. In terms of technology, what do we mean by technology? So there's a petrophysical technology, like Bob just said. The tools become shorter, more compact. They can run faster, more precise, and more accurate. There's also IT technology, like including communication, data transmission, a huge improvement in the last decades. And there's also a software technology. Computing power really improved software technology capabilities. But in terms of petrophysics, what do we do? It basically is a data acquisition in the field, a data processing in the processing center, data interpretation, and the data integration. So by combining the technology and what we do, then we really just improve our productivity and make our product more accurate, more representative of the reservoir, cost effective. Thank you.
I think Jennifer, you are next.
Yep, I'll jump in, I think. Yeah, so as you've already touched on it, there's less about new widgets coming out than how to make them more efficient and how to actually interpret the data off of them. So even the wave of unconventionals, for example, didn't actually spawn so many new widgets, new technologies, new tools, as it did new techniques. And so given the market as it is right now, it's a lot harder to invest the millions of dollars to build an entirely new type of tool and new technology, though some of that work is happily going on for those with bolder investments. But it's a lot more practical to be looking at what we can do with the data of the existing tools, and even how we can better deploy the technology we have. And again, the market I'm working in down here is got a lot of tools that might be quite familiar to the oil and gas people, but you have to make it so that it fits down a much smaller hole, a much shallower hole, and it has to cost a couple of $100 to build a gamma tool, or $400 or $500 to build a density tool, because you can't invest in the $1 million technologies. So I think going forward, we're really going to see a lot more of this over the next few years as well, is figuring out how to tweak what we've got tool-wise, but really focus on better applications of the technology we have. Thanks.
Right. So I would like to give a few thoughts on three aspects of the new technology. One is the sensors conveyance, then information technology, a bit like Mark did, and about the technology of the sensors themselves. So regarding sensors conveyance, I believe that first of all, it has progressed dramatically. Nowadays, wireline cables, tool positioning devices, drill pipe sensors for LWD, tractors for open hole and cased hole, through the bit sensors, coil tubing, digital slick line. All these solutions have greatly improved the acquisition efficiency and the measurement quality in complex conditions. In terms of information technology, we are seeing enormous progress in terms of transmission, storage, and processing of log data. Everything is more efficient to provide a complete formation evaluation. We also have seen over the past 2 years the birth of remote operation control, where we do not need anymore to have full personnel at the well site, and that is a major improvement. And finally, I think that the high performance computing for modeling, for multi-sensor inversion, has improved static volume accuracy and precision, and also improved the contribution to dynamic reservoir models. Finally, the new technology of sensors. There are new measurements in NMR, gamma ray spectroscopy, dielectric propagation, and the problem with them is that they require complex processing and specialized software to extract the full value. And outside of the service and measurement companies and the specialists who supply the measurements, the users in the operating companies or in the geoscience companies don't have easy access to this specialist software and even the training. And therefore, they cannot consistently and independently use the measurements to the full value. So that is something that is an impediment to the spread of sensors new technology. Thank you.
Sid, am I next?
Yes,
Awesome.
go ahead. So
Okay,
yours
awesome.
will be the final mark on this particular question.
Awesome. All right. Well, for me, how technology affecting petrophysics, I think that it is a double-edged sword. We've heard from the various panelists on all the benefits that can come with it, and I do think that there are a lot of benefits in terms of savings, time savings, money savings, efficiency when it comes to certain tools. For example, the NMR logging, and we also have logging while tripping, for example, which is a way of saving time and not having to have a separate wireline run for logging. So that saves us on time and money. So we do see efficiency in terms of data acquisition. We see efficiencies in terms of data analytics whenever we integrate with big data. We kind of see multiple wells at the same time, interpret at the same time. But on the flip side, I think what it also does is we lose some valuable information, especially, for example, if we're looking at big data, we're looking at things in general, we lumping too many things together, we end up losing some of the details. And even though we have the ability to now work remotely with not having to be on the site for the data acquisition, for example, we are losing that part of the experience. We're losing the quality assurance, the experience, operational experience that comes with doing that. So it is a good thing. We just have to be careful and try to manage the adverse effect that come along with it.
Thanks, Asif, for kind of concluding with that remark where you mentioned technology as a double-edged sword, and we have to look at things which we tend to ignore. So that's a great way of ending that particular discussion. So going ahead, right now what we discuss is the current trend in petrophysical technology. Now let's go ahead, let's look into the future of petrophysics. Future is shaped by what we do moment to moment in the present. As they say, the best way to predict future is to create it. So I want to ask all of you, what skills will be important for petrophysicists of the future? Is the future of petrophysicists bright and full of opportunity. For this question, Essie and Mark, you can begin the discussion. Michelle and Bob, you can follow, and Jen, give us some concluding remarks on the future petrophysicists.
Yes, so thank you. So to look at the future, sometimes we ought to look at the past and see and look at trends and see where we're going. So as I'm speaking as somebody who is in their mid-career. So I have a little bit of experience, not as much as some of our panelists, but also not as a fresh person. So for me, you know, in the back in the days, we used to do a lot of hand calculations, and we used to have a lot of operational experience, and those are fading away little by little. So for me, I think that for the next generation, they're going to be there's three main things that are important. I think education, which is the foundational skills, understanding why we are interpreting certain information in certain ways, that we're not using technology just because it's cool or it's neat, but we are actually applying things that we ought to where necessary, and having that background knowledge, not just learning on the job learning is definitely important, but also understanding the physics, understanding the background knowledge, why a certain saturation equation, why how the tool works. So all that foundational educational skills, I think it's going to be really important in the future, especially because we tend to be losing it nowadays. I think it's going to become even more valuable. So it's not just that we're pushing buttons on a computer or something, but we actually do understand what we're doing. And then secondly, I think integration is really important. We use getting into other, providing quality data for other disciplines, whether it's seismic, whether it's for the engineers, just being able to provide quality information to all these disciplines, so that we can have an integral view of the asset that we're looking at. And finally, I think computing skills are really important, because that's just where it looks like we're going. I think we're gonna have to have certain skills when it comes to data analytics, because I do foresee us going that way, even though we have that background knowledge and we understand petrophysics. I think being that person who can also use data properly, use multiple data at the same time and come up with conclusions, I think that would also serve as good. So I'm an optimist, so I do think that the future of petrophysics is bright. We might lose certain positions because we have, you know, data. We have more data and we need less people to do it. But I think that I think looking in the future, that we're on the right path to making good things out of petrophysics.
Thank you. Actually, the future is now. I just figure out how to project myself on the screen. Learning is really a lifetime journey, and happy learning. But in the future, if we still call ourselves as a petrophysicists, then we cannot forget about the rocks and the fluid. So we have to master whatever required for petro, and also the physics. So that is a must. So in terms of data acquisition, data processing, data interpretation, and data integration. Then what is the future? The future now is basically IT development and data science. With the data science, like we just mentioned earlier, that our job will become like a faster, more effective, or cost-effective. Productivity will be increased. So that, you like it or not, we have to master a little bit of IT technology and data science technology that help you to do a better job. Of course, education is the key. Yesterday, we just had a international student paper contest organized by SPWLA. But education, I think in the education area, academics, they catch up. The data science is a main part of it. But in the industry, we have to learn ourselves. Thank you.
Right, I think it's me. So the skills of the future for petrophysicists, there are quite a few, but if we need to summarize, I think that we are observing that formation evaluation is performed in more complex conditions, quite a bit, complex well trajectories, depleted reservoirs, complex completions than in the past. And we also need to make much better prediction of complex phase volume and ability to produce. So the new skills that will be required are complex, actually. Tool response modeling, multi-sensor inversions, a lot of knowledge, practical knowledge, and theoretical knowledge on reservoir fluid engineering. We will need to be able to evaluate uncertainty, and value of information will become more important. Mainly, we will need to provide ready-to-use input for reservoir description and simulation, and for production optimization. That is going to be the main goal. And finally, I can see that formation evaluation and reservoir monitoring behind completion, I don't even say behind casing, because it will be likely behind multiple casings, multiple tubulars, will become more and more predominant.
Thank you, Michelle.
Bob? Yeah.
See, I'd have to agree with you. It pays to learn how to do an analysis by hand. It's the best way to learn what the tools are telling you.
Yes.
But I think everybody's hit all the key points. I think you have to have a good appreciation of the full spectrum of what we work with and how that data plays a role. And so as a petrophysicist, that goes everything from geophysics through drilling all the way to production. We have a role to play in understanding what wells are doing and how we can improve the performance, how we can produce economically. And so we go forward, I think everybody's hit upon one of the key skills that we need to understand is we have to have good appreciation for data analytics and which part of that tool, which one of those tools is the right one for the problem we're working on. It's not a everything's a hammer and a nail situation. I think that goes with that is all of us have to have a foundation in some forms of programming. We're going to try things out and experiment on data on wells. We have to be able to do that. We can't go back to a technology center and say, hey, runs, can you create this little code for something I want to try? It just slows things down. So I think those are important. Integration of data is always important, but I think one of the things that's going to play a critical role going forward is geomechanics. And if we look at just managing existing fields with less exploration, we're going to have to get more out of everything that exists. That means we need to really understand the reservoirs, cap rock integrity for any type of water flood, IOR, EOR. And this then spawns off to what we're doing from an energy transition. As you look at it, geomechanics is one of the key roles when we start looking at it from a CCUS. We have to be able to manage that risk long term. So it's a 4D model. And then the fun part of that, if you're looking at anything from a geothermal, typically ends up to a geomechanics and fracture characterization. So I'm another one, Essie. I think petrophysics has a bright future just because of the range of areas that it can play within our discipline or within the oil and gas industry and the transition. Thank you.
Right, so to wrap it up, I think we've all been on a similar theme with the way the future is going to be data analytics, automations, machine learnings, but we've got to keep our eye on knowing what we're doing, keeping the pen and paper handy. I think we all know the danger of learning to push buttons in fancy software and forgetting exactly you really can't apply Archie's equation just everywhere. So yeah, I think everybody's really come to a similar conclusion that data integration, big data, machine learning, that's definitely going to be part of our future, and we're all going to need to get our hands on it, but we really need to make sure that ourselves and the young people coming along know how to do it on pen and paper in an Excel spreadsheet before they just start throwing giant buckets of data into a giant bucket, stirring it up and believing what comes out of it. So yeah.
Okay, so some great answers from the panelist. Just for the audience, what we'll do towards the end of this panel discussion is we'll look into the future areas of how petrophysics will be used. So that will be towards the end. Now, I see a lot of questions on the chat. Thanks a lot for those questions. Keep those questions and comments coming in. We will address all of them towards the end of the panel discussion. Now, going ahead, I heard it somewhere, a transition period is a period between two transition periods. Okay, there's a popular saying, change is the only constant. Progress is impossible without change. All of us are aware that the oil and gas industry is transitioning. At the same time, this industry, oil and gas industry, has a very important role to play in the global energy transition. So transitions are going on everywhere. What are some important roles of petrophysicists during the transition of the oil and gas industry, as well as the global energy industry overall? For this question, I just want comments from three of you. So I invite Michelle, Mark, and Bob. Please share your thoughts on how is transition happening and how can petrophysicists play a better role, a more informed role in this transitioning industry.
Right, thank you, Sid. So in my comments, really, I can only talk about the oil and gas because I don't have experience or sufficient experience to mention other types of projects. I think in the transition from exploration and appraisal, or the classical sequence of producing a field, means that we need to pay attention a lot more to the well conditions. For example, well integrity in very complex completions, that becomes more and more important. The prevalence of adverse pressure profiles when we are now drilling and logging reservoirs that are highly depleted, and the concerns with always well production, but also recompletion and ultimately well abandonment, which is, for example, in the places like the North Sea, becomes more and more essential as a skill. I believe that hydrocarbon fluids are more complex because we are now dealing with a mixture of sequences of pressure, sustainment and pressure depletion, injection of different fluids and gases. So complex phase behavior is essential in order to calculate correct volumes in place, to predict what hydrocarbon phase is going to be produced, and to avoid as much as possible the production of water. And all of this has to do with secondary and tertiary recovery schemes. When it comes to new projects, I have already mentioned it, but understanding risks and uncertainty and be able to quantify them for new field developments or even for existing projects is becoming really essential. And the only comments I would like to make about CO2 and hydrogen sequestration is that yes, there is probably an avenue for petrophysicists to help with the storage site characterization and the selection, define monitoring plans which are going to be different for those projects, But I believe that the same techniques that are used in the oil and gas will be used as well for those new types of projects with some tuning. Thank you.
Bob and Mark, do you want to share some of your thoughts on how petrophysicists should prepare better for in this transitioning industry?
You had Mark up in front of me. I was going to catch up at the end, but Michelle did a good job of hitting the key part of that transition. We're going to be operating oil and gas fields for a long time. And as that, we're going to be focusing on, we're going to have to understand more and more of the detail to be able to optimize recovery factor. And so that becomes a good opportunity, whether that's additional information, go back and look at old core information, but integrating that and really understanding the flow dynamics. As we go along, we also find we get a lot of problems. So understanding that rock fluid interactions becomes important. But I think if we look forward, is Michelle hit upon the key thing, is CCUS projects are going to be one of the biggest things that drives petrophysics. Just to meet our net carbon zeros is, I think the last numbers I was reading, it's going to take close to 2,000 projects globally to be able to do that. So that's a lot of work. And some of those will be existing fields, will be CCUS EOR projects. A lot of those will be new projects in saline aquifers. And in those environments, we have to go through the whole process we do for reservoir characterization that we do in an oil and gas today. And so I think is that actually I find quite exciting when we start looking at that, is because we get to do a lot of the same things, but we get to do it in a grander scale because we have to make sure that we have good CO2 containment. So we're gonna have to look at everything at reservoir scale, understanding spill points and everything else. And I mentioned just in the previous question, probably the one most important components of that is 4D geomechanics. It's not just understanding things once, but because of the temperature extremes, the CO2 rock interaction stuff is, there's a lot of things that change that need to be considered over time. And then Michelle mentioned the monitoring and everything to close that loop and tie that together. So I find that probably one of the most exciting things. And then the flip side to go with renewables is all the stuff that's going on with geothermal. So we've all been familiar with the traditional convection systems, where we typically look for high permeable, typically a fractured reservoir looking for steam or hot water. But the thing that I find really exciting is the industry's adopting a lot of things that we come up with from the unconventional world for either closed loop systems, drilling wells that intersect, or stimulating between those. And when we get to that arena, once again, that's intense geomechanics to be able to understand that, effectively connect wells and produce those. So I guess I look at there's going to be a lot of fun things going on that are going to take quite a bit of data if we're going to do this correctly. So thank you.
Thank you, Bob. When we talk about transition, like you said, change is the only constant. You know, every day things changes. But when we talk about transition, we need to make sure transition to what? Is that target is fixed, or still there's a huge uncertainty? I mean, talk to different people, you may get different opinion. But anyhow, like we mentioned before, the hard and the soft skills are always there. You will need it to do your job. What are those? The rock and fluid properties, the tool measurements, and with the help of data analytics. Those will be always valuable, whatever you do, wherever you are. Thank you.
Okay, so transition, right? As I mentioned, it's a period between two transition periods. Now let's talk about something that is static, something that is like a foundation. So to build a tall building, we need strong foundation. Without a solid foundation, it is difficult to create anything of value. So my question to the panelist is, what aspects of petrophysics are like the foundation? Aspects that will stay the same like a bedrock. what petrophysical concepts and workflows will remain unchanged in future? So for this question, I invite Jen and Essie to begin the discussion, and then Bob and Michelle can add to this. Let's keep the responses a bit short. We have touched 45 minutes of discussion, and we have 2 more interesting questions to discuss after this. So please go ahead, Essie and Jen. Let's start with you.
Oh, okay, yeah, so I'll keep it short and sweet. So the bread and butter for petrophysics, as you know, is the saturation and the porosity and the lithology. Those are the basics for petrophysics. And then if we wanted to get complicated, we go into relative permeability and things like that. But I think those are just gonna be there forever. We're always gonna want to know what those properties are and how much oil we have in there, so storage. So I'll leave it at that.
Just to add a tiny bit more, as a skill, as a petrophysicist, our biggest skill really is the puzzle solving, the putting the pieces together. So understanding the core foundations, but petrophysicists are about trying to look at things and connect geophysics to engineering to try to be the connecting point and puzzling out how to connect from the beginning to the end of the process. So I think together with the petrophysics foundations, that's our skills, is being able to tie it all together. Yeah.
I'd have to agree. Its fundamentals haven't changed since I've been in here. It's how much hydrocarbon, where's it at, and what's it going to take to get it out. And Mark hit upon it at his closing of the last statement. It really takes detailed understanding of the rock fluid interaction and dynamics to be able to solve that riddle. And so then we can get involved with all the tools and everything we've talked about, how to do that. And probably the real change is we just have more analytics tools today that allow us to spread that knowledge you would get from a few key wells over a broader area. The foundation hasn't changed.
That's right, Bob. So I think it's what will not change, what must remain, is that it's essential for us to that geoscience remains the backbone of petrophysics, and that we do not confuse geoscience with data science. What we know is that for any new or rediscovered concept, the enthusiasm from early adopters drives the development and the progress of those concepts, and often can be at odds with the users of the previous concepts, the previous methods. However, I think that after a period of hesitation or oscillation, the relative adoption of the new concept and the proven or older concepts comes to a natural balance. For example, I always remember the observations of experienced managers after the introduction of new technology of logging. They used to say that we tend to overestimate the growth of that new technology over the first 5 years and to underestimate it beyond that. So the balance is what we will obtain and discover in a little while when everybody will have tried and those various approaches to geoscience or to petrophysics.
Okay, so that's a great statement. Geoscience is not data science. Mark, do you want to add anything to that? If not, we'll just go ahead to the next question.
Yeah, I think I don't have anything new.
Okay.
So I just checked the oil price now is close to $70.
Yeah, that's good.
So
let's move to the next one. And again, this next question is something that's kind of on the minds of a lot of people. It's related to management strategies, management decisions. Okay, it's very difficult for a lot of us who are from the technical domain to understand how the management decides where the management strategy is going on. But the question that is on a lot of our minds is, how has the current management strategies helped as well as challenged our profession as petrophysicists? I want to explore this question with you all. The effects of management decisions related to manpower, investment, R&D, and digitalization. For this question, Bob and Michelle, you can begin the discussion. Mark, you can then join in. And Essie and Jen, you can conclude this discussion.
Very good one, Sid. You trying to put us all on the spot with our managers?
This is a tough one. Yeah.
The first response always is, oh, they're going through a challenging time period, and what's the response? And whether it's an operator or service company, we have to rationalize what's going on based on whatever the price of oil is, right? Is we don't not profitably, none of us are going to be here. So that's first and foremost. With that, we have to structure to do that. And so you look at what does it do for our industry? And I guess having seen a few of those over the years, I would have to say, when you're going through it, everybody's worried, what's going to happen? Are we going to have a discipline and everything else coming out the other side? But every time that I've seen this happen is we've actually come out stronger. And the reason being is the first thing we focus on, some of the things that came up. How do we handle things more efficiently, safely, and everything else? So we look at what's going on with using technology for remote operations, real-time operations. All the things like that that allow us to do the job more efficiently, drives cost out of the system. You look at then how we use data. And so we've worked much more collaborative with our clients, academics, and making sure that we get the right information, intense information on key wells, and how can we translate that over a broader area, the reservoir, into other analogs. How do we reduce the learning cycles as we go forward? And so I don't know what the right answer is, because every company has different metrics that drive their decisions. But all I can say is, from my past experience, is that increased collaboration and focusing on the end goal. How do we cost effectively produce a barrel of oil? We end up coming out stronger on the other end.
Yeah, Sid. So you threw a wild ball there. Okay, so I think the role of management is, I think, pretty much to preserve the business. That means, as Bob said, cut when required at the right time. And this is always going to generate disappointment for individuals, whether they are in research, in engineering, in operation, in sales. But what we have seen over the several periods or events of oil crisis is that when the vision is true, correct, and well implemented, when the vision is solid and smart, then the future is assured for the company, for that industry, or for the new industry as it rebuilds itself after the crisis. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I would say, oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I forgot the order there.
Go ahead.
If I could jump in with the just to put everybody's head in a spin, the other end of the spectrum, iron ore was $205 a ton today, which is almost all-time high, and we have quite the opposite problem that management has to deal with. I have to deal with, which is we can't hire skilled people fast enough to do data interpretation, to be wireline loggers, to run autonomous vehicles. We can't hire them fast enough as an industry. So we're having to come up with the all this great new stuff, this massive quantities of data, and there quite literally isn't anyone out there you can just hire that's ready to go. So you've got to be clever about how you hire people, knowing that you're going to have to train skills into them. So we'd rather hire somebody who's got the right way of thinking and have to train them into some petrophysics and geophysics work. And I'm not just I'm not trying to rub it into anyone who's having to make those difficult calls. The downside will come to us again as well. But when the times are good, we're trying to be smart about investing in the right people and putting the right skills in place. And that is actually more of a challenge than you might think. When the industry, the petrophysics side of the industry, I'd say, has tripled in the last 3 to 4 years. And there's not that many petrophysicists around. And you've got to train them up. So.
Thank you, Jennifer. It's really very good example. I don't want to say the oil and gas industry tomorrow will be what she was talking about today. So really, we need to have a much longer term planning, especially for manpower, starting from education. Please pay attention to academic education and the young professional development. The oil and gas will always be there to be explored and produced, but people may not be. Thank you.
Awesome.
That's
So
a powerful statement. Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead, Essie.
Okay, wonderful. Awesome. Yeah, so it is definitely an interesting times and challenging times. And as you know, like somebody said earlier, management is here to keep the business. So, you know, they're doing their job, and we petrophysicists have our jobs to do. So the main consequences of, you know, lack of manpower is that we end up, those of us that are left end up having to work longer hours and having to have more to do, and even possibly with less information. So we made some companies exiting consortia, for example, so we don't have all the data that we need to make information, whether it's out from consortia or even inside the company. We may not have all the logs that we need to make the calls and come up with answers, but obviously we are still expected to give answers. So there has been definitely some challenges there, but in terms of individuals and petrophysicists and professionals, you have to make sure that you take care of yourself as well. So make sure that you have a good work-life balance. I just wanted to throw that out there, because that is the only thing you have under your own control. Is you can take some time off, you can refresh, take a break once in a while, and take care of yourself in that way. So but this will all pass, and we'll have new people coming in who have hopefully either experience or younger staff, and our job is to make sure that we pass on the knowledge to them as well, so that we could eventually balance out the workload that's coming up, that's on us right now. So just, you know, hang in there, and this will pass too.
Great. Okay, so management has to take a lot of tough decisions. It's never easy to be a manager, right? So let's end this panel discussion with something upbeat, something that a lot of young petrophysicists can benefit from, who are new, who are seeing these transitions happening. So various industries depend on sensing the subsurface Earth. A lot of industries depend on quantifying the subsurface properties. A lot of industries depend on making decisions based on interpretation of subsurface data. So everything that I've been mentioning is somewhat very close to petrophysics. Looking beyond oil and gas, what are future areas where the art and science of petrophysics will be needed? What industries and activities should the young petrophysicists of today prepare themselves for? So for this particular question, Jen, I think you're the best person to begin the discussion. Michelle, Essie, Mark, you can follow up, and Bob, please conclude this particular question. What are the future areas where art and science of petrophysics will be needed?
Well, again, I think the best advice I have to young people these days is have a broad skill set. instead of focusing on a very narrow area of conventionals or unconventionals, or being chasing down a path of carbonate reservoirs. Get your basic skill sets broad to be able to apply as the industry changes. So at one point it was the unconventionals that was a totally different way of looking at things, that we were all basically applying skills we had, but we were having to learn, all of us were having to learn as we went. Again, you get into something, geothermals, you get into mining, etc. You're still using the same core foundation, but be flexible about how to interpret that data. Be eager to learn, eager to contribute, eager to take both old ideas and adapt them, as well as taking modern machine learning, etc. ideas from other industries and applying them to ours. Yeah.
Yeah, so again, I don't have really any expertise to predict the future outside of the oil and gas. But what we have experienced within my company has been that the management, I think, is seeing the big picture and is able to branch out into industries that when we do a day-to-day job, we are not really able to see. We don't have time to really think much about the future. So if the future of petrophysics involves something else than oil and gas, then it means no more hydrocarbons to take care of. It won't matter anymore about the saturation of gas and oil. So that leaves us with the rock properties in terms of geomechanics, in terms of mineralogy, in terms of texture. And therefore, those elements that are a little bit at the circumference of petrophysics are becoming more and more important. Whether it is geothermal projects, which is what I'm mostly familiar with, or maybe storage of CO2, which is another type of gas, then we still need to be very precise in the description of the rocks and its properties versus time, versus different conditions of temperature, chemical interaction, and pressure. However, I wish I could be very optimistic about the future, but at the moment, I think that the number of specialists that are going to be required to take care of those different specialties may not be as large as what we see at the moment for the oil and gas. But I could be completely wrong, which I hope I am.
Michelle, I hope you are wrong too. I like to be optimistic, but in terms of future areas of petrophysics, I think of petrophysics, the name itself, it's about rock. It's about properties of rock, physical properties of rock. So for me, anywhere that there is rock and that we need to find out what the properties are, I think petrophysics is going to be needed. So I was even thinking space, because there's rocks there that we're exploring. So we might need a petrophysicist there at some point. But that's, for me, that's the fundamental. If there's no rock involved, then it's probably not petrophysics anymore. And like somebody said, it's probably data science. It's not petrophysics, so it's something else, whatever that may be. So as long as there's rock involved, whether it's in the oil and gas, the mining industry, things like that, we petrophysicists will be needed. And I don't think oil and gas is going anywhere anytime soon. I think the demand is going to increase, and I think that with that increase will come all kinds of all kinds of needs for not only petrophysicists but geoscientists as well. So if this is something that you love to do, the petrophysicists on this call, everyone that's watching, obviously, I would encourage you to do it with passion, do it with integrity, do it with gratitude, and be optimistic about the future. And if it's not something that is of passion to you, then obviously then you would look for what that passion is and give it your all. But like I said earlier, I like to be optimistic. So I think that the future is looking good.
Very quickly, I can add two more areas. One is the environmental science and engineering. The other one is the groundwater. So we know how to find oil and gas. It's much simpler to find the drinking water. That's a big issue for the world population. Thank you.
Bob, your concluding remarks on this question?
Having fun finding my mute button. I'd like to thank you, Sid, for hosting this and discussion with the panel. And, you know, is what the future is going to be. Do we want to be optimistic or pessimistic of the view? And I think everybody else has done a good job of hitting the highlights of the opportunities as we grow outside oil and gas. I'm surprised Jennifer on mining didn't mention subsea mining, which has got some interesting project going on. I'm glad SE mentioned space because I'm a little old, but I volunteered to go to Mars and help solve that one out. It can be quite exciting. And I'm glad Mark mentioned water, because if you start looking at a lot of the information, water is the next oil and gas. So that means we're gonna have to manage it. That means understanding flow dynamics, all the rocks and stuff that go with it. But I want to put a little other twist. To me, it's about a mindset of the skill sets that we develop to solve problems. I think that was your comment, or solve puzzles, Jennifer, and I think that's right. And one example I'll give you is where I was at, we actually had a well integrity petrophysicist. And you go, what the heck does that have to do with rocks or fluids? But having detailed understanding of tool physics, when it came to understanding cement and casing integrity, keeping fields operations was critical. And so he actually had a person that was heavily involved in that area of the business. And so I think you look at it as, I agree, you got to keep a broad mind, you got to look at a lot of things. And it comes down to, I think, is in my mind, three things that I like to call the 3 Ps. If I get them in the right order anyways, first one is passion for what you do. You constantly got to be looking at how you can expand your knowledge, looking for things you can get involved in the industry. If you stay just looking at one part, that's when you become, I hate to say, expendable. You got to reach out and get involved in the company. You have to help it make money. After that, you have to have a purpose. You have to have a goal out there. What do you want to accomplish in the industry? And then you have to have persistence to follow it up. You have to keep working at it. It never ends. But at once in a while and every day, I make a bunch of mistakes, but I learn something new. And I think that's the fun part I've had as a petrophysicist over the years. There's always something new that I can learn. Thank you.
Great. So with that, thanks a lot to all the panelists for spending time with us, for kind of thinking about this question, answering these questions. And now what we have is we have Adam. He will help us by trying to raise some of the questions and comments that are on chat. And what I encourage the panelists to do is, if there is a question or a comment that you would like to respond, please do. And let's keep the responses short. Let's have 1 or 2 comments per question and then move on to the next one, because what I see is a lot of different and interesting questions. Now, with that, what I'll do is, Adam, please take over and let's get into the Q&A. Thank you.
Thanks, Sid. Everybody knows I like asking questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, also, I would like to remind the audience to upvote your favorite questions, even if you don't ask one yourself. That will help us figure out what you want to hear. So, with that, one of the highest rated questions right now is from Dr. Carlos Torres Verdun, we all know and love. And I'm going to modify it slightly. He asks, what is the future of unconventionals and unconventional petrophysics and geomechanics in the energy transition? But I would qualify that to say that was kind of, been the fad or one of the most popular topics for the last 5 years. So is there more to do in that, or are we going to pivot towards some of these other avenues? So with that.
Well, I guess I can jump in.
Yeah, feel free to answer. So these questions, what we can do is respond with one or two of the panels. So please go ahead.
Okay. All right. For me, I think the unconventionals also are here to stay. And when it comes to geomechanics, it's very, very much very important. We use petrophysics here at Apache. We use petrophysics with our geomechanical petrophysicists to try to estimate the mud weight that's going to be needed for the rock and for the drillers. So it has been very critical to have petrophysics involved with the planning of the wells that we're drilling for unconventionals, horizontals, laterals. So it is very important, and I think that it's here to stay.
Yeah, a quick comment. I think it's extremely difficult to predict, to make predictions, especially about the future. So that was famous catcher for the New York Mets, who was a philosopher who said that. Anyway, I think that the future of organic shales around the world, and especially in the US, is up to a political decision almost. I think that it's tough to make that prediction. What I sense is a more immediate problem is almost the lack of interest of operators towards data, measurement of log data. The reliance on existing databases for making historical studies, because there is a wealth of old logs in the vicinity of existing or new projects, and this is a problem, especially in the extremely low ratio of logged data in horizontal drains, where only 1 out of thousands of wells is being logged, really. So that, for me, is the immediate concern, and the fact that more than a policy, there is a no-log policy that is really a hindrance on the future of unconventional in the US. And not so much elsewhere. Elsewhere, China, Algeria, etc., Argentina, people are acquiring data in horizontal drains.
Very quickly, I think we still need to do a lot of research. Carlos and other professors on R&D centers can do a lot of contribution. Basically, still, where is it? How much is it? How can we produce it economically? Thank you.
I think you hit upon it, Michelle, is there's going to be a political and social influence no matter what, but in the end, it'll come down to, can we cost effectively produce barrels and compete? And I think we continue to show that, yes, that's viable. The thing that I find interesting is we're actually seeing, I don't want to say a big shift, but we are seeing more interest used in getting more data. And a lot of it has to do about proper well placement within the reservoir. And so actually, I think it becomes, we went this full cycle of we can put wells anywhere, and if we frack them with a big enough frack, we can economically produce. At $100 oil, that may be the case, but today that's not. So we have to get smarter in what we're doing. So barring the political and social impact, I think there is still a fair amount of work to be done in unconventionals. And then taking what we learned from that and continue to work with the countries you mentioned, Algeria, Argentina, so on and so forth.
All right, I think we have time for maybe one more very quick question. We do want to get to this. Majority of generated data from the transactions is being lost with experiential knowledge. Does the SPWLA have a place for creating standards for data in ML and data analytics? And that was asked by Andrew Berry. So maybe everybody could give just a quick 10-second answer. We are a little bit over time.
I think it does have a place. I think that it's still too new to be standardized, but it's the time to get in early to try to get best practices, might be where we are right now, rather than actual standards for machine learning and data analytics. Maybe we're a bit too early to make standards. What do you think?
I would agree, Jennifer, but one of the things we could do is we could create a data analytics SIG, just like we do for several of the other things. The SPE started their digital forum almost 2.5 years ago. And it was a good place for a lot of the early discussions and started channeling things.
Great idea. All right. I'll sign up.
Go ahead. I'm serving on the SPWLA Education Special Interest Group. I will bring this topic to the VP Education, Siska.
Yeah, for me, I would like to see the SPWLA, of course, setting standards, technical standards, that's for sure. What I would like to see, though, for the SPWLA is a more obvious involvement in the business of petrophysics, not being only a repository of great technical achievements, community support, but also being an influencer in terms of the future business for petrophysics.
Yeah, I'll just agree with the preceding comments. I think we're still early, and it's going to require some time to research and do some more studying before standards will come. And I would definitely look forward to seeing standards.
Well, wonderful topic. I think if no one else has any responses, then we should probably go to Tegwin to talk about the technical session now. Thank you for everybody participating in this panel. It was wonderful. You guys did a great job.
Thanks a lot, all the panelists. Thanks a lot, Adam, for getting this thing organized. There are a lot of questions. We couldn't address all those. But thanks a lot for the audience for asking those questions.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Adam.
Take care.
Thanks, Sid.
Good luck.
Thank you, everyone. Paul, so we move to Tegwin.
Yes, over to Tegwin to introduce the technical sessions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Siddharth and panelists, for a fascinating look into the future. Hello, everyone. I'm Tegwin Perkins. I became VP Technology almost a year ago, and at the time, I think we all believed, or at least wished, that we would have an in-person symposium in Boston for 2021. I was looking forward to taking in a game at Fenway Park, eating delicious food in the Italian district, and, hopefully, not breaking down in the Callahan Tunnel on the way to Logan Airport again. Instead, circumstances dictated that we would inevitably be holding another online symposium. However, unlike my predecessor, Michael O'Keefe and his colleagues, we had the time to plan a more formal event. Not a direct replacement for an in-person symposium, but one that had a lot of the events normally associated with one. The first task of the new VP Technology is to select their technology committee. Typically, members of the TC stay for a term of 3 years, but that is discretional. This year, I invited 11 new members to join an existing core of 27 for a total of 38 members. The new members are shown in yellow. They are based on 5 continents, come from a mix of operators and service companies, consultancies and academia, and have an average of 22 years experience. It should be noted that we had just over a 2-to-1 ratio of operators to service company personnel on the TC. I have to say that it was a privilege to work with such an amazing group of diligent, generous professionals. I really couldn't have done it without them. Nobody could. I would like to thank them individually, but in the interest of time, we should do so collectively. Last week, we held 4 outstanding short courses. The course titles, team leads and instructors are shown on the slide. 3 were driven by the TC and the 4th was generously offered to SPWLA by Gary Gunter and his colleagues. All of them were well attended with a total of 147 students. What stands out for me is the enthusiasm and dedication of all who attended, instructors and students alike. I was also pleased to see the diversity of subjects discussed. Obviously they were all petrophysics based, but the discipline now includes artificial intelligence and the energy transition. I'd like to thank our keynote speaker, Neil McCollum, my boss's boss, for that thought-provoking view of the industry. Some of us may not share all of his sentiments, but I think it encapsulates the world we live in today. Working in the background to deliver the panel discussion has been Adam Hacker. He was responsible for assembling the talent we showcased earlier today. Siddharth Mesra was an excellent choice as moderator, and I thought the panel shared some very candid opinions. The International Student Paper Contest is an annual competition for students from around the world. This year's contest started in January with several local events. The local event winners in each category moved forwards to the international final, which was held yesterday, the results of which will be announced Wednesday at the awards ceremony hosted by former SPWLA President Jesus Salazar. I'd like to thank Francesca Gonowan, who is the VP Education, and Martin Poich, ISPC Chair, for championing this contest. And now the technical sessions. When we started this process back in July last year, we didn't really know what to expect. We made the call for abstracts and waited. I'm glad to say that even with the pandemic, the drop in the oil price and the knock-on that had, we still received 251 abstracts. This is down on recent years, but still a healthy outcome. Of those 251 abstracts, we accepted into the proceedings of the 62nd SPWLA Annual Symposium 118 papers. All of them will be presented orally, although they have been pre-recorded for precautionary reasons, and will be made available afterwards on demand for a limited time. I'd like to take a minute to explain the abstract ranking method used. First, the ranking method is completely anonymous and unbiased. Only Stephanie in the business office and I were aware of the authors' names and affiliations until after the ranking was complete. Each of the TC members received 100 abstracts with only the title, abstract number and abstract content visible. No reviewers received any abstracts written by anyone from their organisation, and the primary distribution was based on members' specialisms. The abstracts were ranked from 100, their best liked, down to 1, their least liked. Every abstract received at least 14 reviews. Results were combined to yield mean and weighted mean values. At the TC review meeting, we decided that all abstracts with a weighted mean over 50 would be accepted. There were no exceptions. As you can see from the slide, the top 4 subjects were formation evaluation of conventional reservoirs and of unconventional reservoirs, advances in machine learning, and new borehole technology. Together, these 4 topics made up nearly 75% of the submissions. Others received much less. I will suggest that a review of these topics should be made before we open the call for abstracts for 2022. As expected, North America provided most of the abstracts and subsequent papers. However, all regions had a strong showing except for South America, a region we can look to encourage moving forwards. Finally, when we look at the first author affiliation, we can see that service companies dominate. This shouldn't really be a surprise given the significant investment they make into R&D. We also see strong showings from international oil companies and academia. We're going to try something new this year. It is the responsibility of the TC to decide upon the symposium's best paper and the distinguished speaker list. However, we're keen to discover which presentations interest you the most. Therefore, we have added the ability for you to vote for your paper of the day on the SPWLA World website. Your selections will assist the TC. To do so, visit spwlaworld.org and navigate to the appropriate day on the timetable tab. Scroll to the bottom and complete the form. Please use the email address that you used to register for the symposium, as only registered attendees can vote. Click Submit when completed. You can vote as many times as you like, but only the last one will count. Earlier submissions will just be overwritten. Before we begin the technical sessions, I'd like to say a few thank yous. First, for all their amazing efforts, I'd like to thank the Technology Committee. I've said it before, but I'm happy to say it again. I really couldn't have done it without them. Additional praise should be lauded upon those who were involved with the workshops and volunteered for chairing sessions. If I had to single out a few individuals from the TC, I'd like to mention Robert Gales and Michel Claverie for providing clarity when required throughout the year. Paul Craddock and his organising committee managed to pivot halfway through the year and have delivered an amazing platform for this symposium. I would also like to thank Javier Miranda, who's not only the Houston chapter president, but also on both the technology and organising committees, to name but a few. All my fellow board members have played their role, but none more so than VP Information Technology Lin Liang. He has been paramount in delivering the platform we are all watching now. I'd also like to thank Katerina Yared and James Hemingway for all their advice throughout the year, and Nelson Suarez for always accepting every task I've ever thrown at him. At times, the role of VP Technology has felt like a full-time job. I'm pleased to say that Lloyd's Register has provided me support throughout the year, and my boss, Derek Crombie, has allowed me the latitude to perform these duties. Finally, I'd like to thank my family, Jules and Victoria, for tolerating me most of the time. And finally, I hereby declare that the SPWLA 62nd Annual Symposium technical sessions are now open. Please join us after the break for session 1A on production logging, or for session 1B on part 1 of conventional reservoir petrophysics. Enjoy.
Thank you so much, Tegwin. Thank you, Lynn, for hosting this. Thank you, everybody who has contributed through the questions or through the speaking engagements. Again, we thank you so much for everybody's contribution. It was amazing that we were within 2 minutes of the end time of this 2-hour session. So fantastic job to all involved. Finally, I would again like to say thank you, and this closes the opening plenary session. We will take a 15-minute break, and then we will see you back online in either session 1A, production logging, or session 1B, conventional reservoir petrophysics. You will join all these sessions in the same way that you joined the plenary today, so we should have no issues, and we look forward to seeing you back in about 15 minutes from now. Thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy.
Okay, thank you. I will cut off this session. Also stop live streaming. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Fantastic job, Lynn. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah, excellent. Well done.